September 17, 1944, 13:30 hours, Eindhoven, Netherlands. For hours, the Dutch countryside had been quiet, just the rustle of autumn wind across cornfields. And then, the silence fractures. A low rumble swells into a thunderous roar as 1,500 C-47 Dakotas flood the sky in tight formation, their silver wings glinting in the sun. Behind them, hundreds of Horsa and Waco gliders strain against tow cables, laden with jeeps, anti-tank guns, even bulldozers. And then the miracle, the sky blossoms open. Tens of thousands of parachutes flare into white domes, drifting downward like snow in broad daylight. To Dutch civilians, it looks like salvation descending from heaven. To German sentries, it feels like the end of the world. On the ground, farmers drop their hoes and weep openly. Children point skyward, their cries drowned by the growl of engines. German officers bark frantic orders as flak guns pound upward, shattering parachutes and tearing the air with black bursts. The sky becomes a canvas of chaos, engines droning, parachutes cracking in the wind, shells detonating in fire and smoke. For the first time in history, an entire airborne army rains down behind enemy lines. An audacious strike to seize bridges, slice through Germany's defenses, and open a single road to the Rhine. Germany is not just surprised. Germany is stunned. The Paratrooper Blitz has begun. What fell over Holland on September 17, 1944, was not just soldiers. It was the largest airborne assault in human history. An entire army dropped from the heavens, 35,000 paratroopers and glider troops in a single day. They were carried by 1,500 C-47 Dakotas and escorted by more than 500 lumbering Horsa and Waco gliders, their wooden frames groaning as they carried jeeps, anti-tank guns, howitzers, bulldozers, and even small reconnaissance vehicles. For the first time, not only men, but the backbone of an entire fighting division descended by parachute and canvas wing. The objective was audacious, almost unbelievable. By capturing a chain of 9 vital bridges, from Eindhoven to Arnhem, the Allies would create a 64-mile corridor through the Netherlands. Down this single highway, the armored spearhead of 33rd Corps would charge into Germany, bypassing the Siegfried Line, plunging into the Ruhr, and striking at the very heart of Nazi industry. This was not a raid. This was not a gamble for a single city. This was a plan to end the war by Christmas, to collapse the Reich from within with one lightning strike from the sky. For the Germans on the ground, it was a terrifying new kind of blitz. No longer tanks breaking through the Ardennes, but paratroopers descending silently, relentlessly, everywhere at once. For the men drifting beneath their canopies, it was destiny. The Paratrooper Blitz was not just bold, it was unprecedented. It was history rewritten in the sky. By early September 1944, the Allies seemed unstoppable. After breaking out of Normandy, Patton's tanks thundered across France. Paris rose in liberation. Brussels fell. Even Antwerp, with its vast port, was in Allied hands. Soldiers joked they would be home by Christmas. The German army, they believed, was collapsing. But momentum is fragile in war. At the gates of Germany, the advance slowed to a crawl. The Siegfried Line, a wall of bunkers, dragon's teeth, and minefields, loomed ahead like a scar across the land. Supplies lagged behind. Fuel was rationed drop by drop. Every bridge destroyed by retreating Germans forced long detours. Autumn rains began to lash the Low Countries, turning flat Dutch fields into seas of mud. The Allies faced a cruel truth. If they attacked head-on, the war could drag on for another year. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery offered a way out. A single bold thrust, he declared, and we could be across the Rhine before the enemy knows what has happened. His vision was breathtaking. Instead of grinding through the Siegfried Line, the Allies would leap over it by seizing a carpet of bridges through Holland and unleashing XXX Corps' armor down one narrow highway, slicing into the Ruhr, the very beating heart of German industry. But brilliance teetered on the edge of recklessness. The entire plan rested on a single lifeline: Hell's Highway, a thin ribbon of asphalt perched above flat, exposed farmland. If the road was cut, the tanks would be trapped, a steel column strangled in the open. And then came the intelligence reports, quiet warnings dismissed in the rush to glory. Dutch resistance whispered that the 9th and 10th SS Panzer divisions, bloodied but not broken, were resting near Arnhem. To Allied commanders, Arnhem was supposed to be the easy bridge, the final step. To the paratroopers about to descend, it would become a death trap. Market Garden promised triumph before Christmas, but in its shadows lurked hunger, fire, and the bitter truth that war rarely bends to bold dreams. Market Garden was a battle of contrasts, of numbers, machines, and visions colliding in the autumn skies of Holland. On the Allied side stood the promise of overwhelming strength and daring innovation. 35,000 paratroopers and glider troops hurled into battle in a single day. An entire airborne army dropped from the sky. 1,500 C-47 Dakotas, their wings glittering in the sun, each capable of carrying 28 paratroopers or towing a glider into the fight. Over 500 lumbering Horsa and Waco gliders, wooden giants straining under loads of jeeps, 6-pounder anti-tank guns, howitzers, mortars, ammunition, even bulldozers to carve out landing strips. For the first time, war machines descended from the air alongside the men who would fight them. Elite divisions, the 101st Airborne, Screaming Eagles, tasked with seizing bridges near Eindhoven, the 82nd Airborne, All-American, assigned to the critical crossings at Grave and Nijmegen, and the British 1st Airborne Division entrusted with the prize of Arnhem. Later, the Polish 1st Parachute Brigade would join the fight, and waiting on the ground, the armored hammer of the British XXX Corps, hundreds of Sherman tanks, Cromwells, self-propelled guns, armored cars and infantry columns, ready to charge up the highway once the carpet of bridges was laid. It was a vision of lightning war from the sky, mobility, surprise, and overwhelming force, brought together in a single coordinated thrust. Yet across the fields and canals of Holland, Germany still waited, battered but far from beaten. The 9th and 10th SS Panzer divisions, written off as shattered after Normandy, had quietly regrouped near Arnhem. Veterans of the Eastern Front in France, their ranks still included Panthers, Tigers, and Stug assault guns, armored Predators with 75mm and 88mm cannons that could burn a Sherman tank from over a mile away. Around them, makeshift Kampfgruppen were assembled from every resource the Reich could muster. Wehrmacht infantry, Luftwaffe ground crews, police units, even Navy sailors pressed into service as riflemen. They lacked finesse, but under ruthless German discipline, they became a web of defenders knitting itself around the drop zones. The Germans also enjoyed a hidden advantage: interior lines of communication. Their units could shift along railways and local roads far faster than Allied paratroopers cut off from heavy transport, and where the Allies relied on one narrow lifeline, Hell's Highway, the Germans could strike from both sides. The balance sheet was striking. The Allies commanded the skies, wielded massive numbers, and carried the optimism of ending the war by Christmas. The Germans, though fewer and bruised, held the steel teeth of Panzer divisions, the speed of interior lines, and the underestimated ferocity of a cornered enemy. Thus, Market Garden became a gamble on the most dangerous scale. Could silk canopies and sheer courage overwhelm iron armor and disciplined fire? Could thousands of men descending from the heavens bend history itself before Germany's steel fist closed upon them? September 20th, 1944, 1500 hours. The River Waal, Nijmegen. The air was heavy with smoke and the sharp stench of cordite. On the far side of the river, the great steel arch of the Nijmegen Bridge loomed like a gate to destiny. To reach it, the men of the 82nd Airborne Division would have to do the impossible: cross the broad, mile-wide wall in flimsy canvas boats, in broad daylight, under the full weight of German fire. Major Julian Cook knew what awaited his men. He stood before them, his face streaked with grime, his voice steady but fierce. "We go now, and we do not stop until the far bank is ours." Around him, paratroopers, many barely 20 years old, tightened their helmets, gripped their rifles, and climbed into the boats. There were only 26 in all, thin-skinned and fragile, more suited for calm lakes than rivers swept by machine gun fire. As the first boats pushed off, the Germans opened up. Machine guns rattled from bunkers, mortars thumped, artillery shells shrieked overhead. The river churned with geysers of water and flame. Bullets shredded canvas. Men toppled into the current, thrashing and vanishing. The roar was deafening. Cook rose to his feet in the middle of his boat, standing tall against the storm. He began to shout the Hail Mary at the top of his lungs. "Hail Mary, full of grace!" His voice cut through the chaos. The men joined in, their paddles snapping under strain, forcing them to row with rifle butts, helmets, even bare hands. Boat after boat sank, but more pressed forward. Somehow, by faith, fury, and sheer willpower, enough boats slammed into the far bank. The survivors tumbled out, soaked and bleeding, and without hesitation charged straight into German positions. Bayonets flashed, grenades detonated, and within hours, against all odds, the far bank was seized. By nightfall, the Nijmegen Bridge stood in Allied hands. The cost was terrible. Nearly half the men never made it back. The river ran red with their sacrifice, and yet their victory shocked even the enemy. One captured German officer later confessed, "We thought it was madness. No soldier could cross in daylight and live." But they did. The Waal crossing was not simply a battle. It was a moment when courage outweighed reason, when men rode into hell with prayers on their lips and fire all around, carving their place in history on a river of blood. The fate of Operation Market Garden came crashing to its climax in two places, Nijmegen and Arnhem. At Nijmegen, on September 20th, 1944, the impossible had been achieved. After the slaughter of the Waal crossing, the 82nd Airborne stormed the far bank, and the Guards Armored Division thundered across the bridge. Sherman tanks rolled forward into the city, their tracks clanging on steel, their silhouettes framed by fire and smoke. Dutch civilians poured into the streets, cheering, crying, throwing flowers. For a fleeting moment, victory felt within reach. The road to Arnhem was finally open. But time in war is as deadly as bullets. The tanks that crossed Nijmegen could not move fast enough up the narrow Hell's Highway. Every mile brought ambushes, broken bridges, traffic jams, and constant German counterattacks. By the time British armor clawed its way north, Arnhem was already drowning in fire. There the story was different, grim and heroic. The British 1st Airborne Division, scattered by poor drops, fought desperately to regroup. Only one battalion under Lieutenant Colonel John Frost reached the Arnhem Bridge. For 4 days, Frost and 700 paratroopers clung to one end of the span. German tanks roared into the town, their guns blasting buildings into rubble. Mortar shells screamed down on the British perimeter. Ammunition dwindled to single rounds. Men fought room by room, floor by floor, bayonet against bayonet. In cellars beneath shattered houses, the wounded lay in darkness. Some sang hymns to drown the thunder above. Others whispered farewells. Frost, calm even as the walls shook, radioed his last words. Out of ammo. God save the King. On September 25th, battered, starving, with no relief in sight, the order was given to withdraw. Under the cover of night and rain, shattered remnants of the division slipped back across the Rhine. Out of nearly 10,000 men who had landed at Arnhem, fewer than 2,000 returned. The rest were dead, wounded, or taken prisoner. The outcome was brutal. Market Garden had seized bridges, liberated swathes of southern Holland, and stunned the world with its audacity. But the grand design, crossing the Rhine, striking into Germany, lay in ruins. Arnhem had not been taken. The dream of ending the war by Christmas had died on the banks of the Rhine. For Germany, it was proof that the Reich could still fight. For the Allies, it was a bitter lesson. Courage alone could not overcome flawed strategy. And for history, Arnhem became a single haunting epitaph. A bridge too far. Operation Market Garden was not just a military operation. It was a vision, a gamble, and ultimately a warning etched into the last chapter of World War II. On one hand, it showcased the limitless bravery of the Allied paratroopers. From Eindhoven to Grave, from Nijmegen to Arnhem, young men dropped from the skies and fought with a ferocity that stunned even their enemies. The Waal crossing in daylight was nothing short of suicidal, yet it succeeded. For historians, it stands as one of the most courageous acts of the entire war. But Arnhem revealed the other side of the coin, that bravery, no matter how pure, cannot always compensate for flawed planning. Airborne troops were dropped too far from their objectives. Intelligence underestimated German strength. Logistics choked the single road. Hell's Highway, that all depended on. Arnhem was not lost because the British paratroopers faltered. It was lost because the plan had asked the impossible. The consequences rippled far beyond the battlefield. The dream of crossing the Rhine in 1944 and ending the war by Christmas evaporated. Instead, the Netherlands, north of the Rhine, remained trapped in occupation. The people suffered through the hunger winter of 1944-45, when food ran out and thousands starved in the cold. Market Garden's failure was not just military, it was human, scarring an entire nation. For Germany, Arnhem was a grim triumph. It restored a fleeting sense of pride and resistance. The sight of SS Panzers crushing British paratroopers in the ruins told the Reich that, even battered, it still had claws. It convinced many Germans that surrender could be delayed, that more blood could yet be demanded. And so the war dragged on, months longer, with countless more lives lost. For history, Market Garden remains a lesson in ambition and reality. Bold vision can inspire. Courage can achieve miracles. But without timing, logistics, and realism, even the bravest armies are led into traps they cannot escape. One historian put it best: "It was not courage that failed at Arnhem. It was the plan today. The bridges of Eindhoven, Grave, and Nijmegen still stand, silent witnesses to victory. Arnhem, too, still stands, silent witness to sacrifice. Together, they remind us that war is never certain, and that every gamble, however bold, has a price written in blood." The ruins of Arnhem still stand, silent against the wind, a reminder of courage unmatched and sacrifice beyond measure. The bridges of Eindhoven, Grave, and Nijmegen tell the story of triumph, but Arnhem tells the story of loss. Market Garden remains etched in history as a vision too bold, a gamble too great, and a lesson too costly. It reminds us that war is never predictable, and that even the bravest soldiers cannot always overcome the flaws of men who plan. Yet in their failure, there was greatness. In their sacrifice, there was meaning. And in their courage, there was a legacy that endures. If you seek more untold stories of World War II, moments of heroism, tragedy, and history's silent echoes, join us at Oblivion Archive, because the past is never gone. It still whispers, waiting to be heard.